Thinking about key skills in strength and conditioning. There's an array of conflicting literature coupled with variation in individual aims, fitness and motivation levels that, in addition to the fact that physical response to strength training programs vary substantially, designing an exercise program for achieving maximal strength can remain challenging, controversial, and should be considered very much an art rather than a precise science. So it will vary very much depending on the patient that walks through your door. There is no right recipe for everybody. This is just a really nice infographic that shows the evidence that is available in relation to the overall impact of sport and physical activity. So the green shows the good evidence, the amber shows there's a mixed level of evidence, and then the red shows where there's big gaps in evidence. So the big gaps in longitudinal studies, big gaps in impact on older individuals, and also thinking about the impact on subgroups as well. So for muscle strength and endurance, so muscle strength is defined as the ability of the muscle to generate a maximal force. Muscle endurance is the ability of the muscle to generate a force over and over again. Increasing muscle strength will generally increase muscle endurance. However, improving muscle endurance does not significantly improve muscle strength. Thinking about the 1 rep max. So the 1 rep max is the amount of weight a person can lift for 1 repetition. Normally, its application is primarily used to determine the appropriate resistance or weight when designing training protocols. Why do you think that we don't use the 1 rep max normally within the rehabilitation setting? So this is just a really quick task. So calculation of the 1 rep max. So select a resistance or weight which would allow your client to perform between 10 and 15 repetitions. So where at least 10 repetitions could be performed, but no more than 15 when the exercise is taken to the point of volitional muscular fatigue or VMF. So using the chart on the left, calculate your client's 1 rep max for any exercise. So you want to use the Epley's formula. So your 1 rep max is equal to the weight of 1 plus R over 30. So first of all, what you'd do is you'd start off with R, which is your number of repetitions. So for this, we'll say it's 10. Divided by 30, which gives you 0.33. Then you add 1, so it's 1.33. So your weight, which potentially would be 100, so you would then times that by 100, which gives you 133 kilos. So your 1 rep max would be 133 kilos. So if you think about the percentage maximum on the left-hand side, so 100% of your 1 rep max would be 133 kilos. If you're wanting that person to work at 50% of their overall max, you're then looking at 66 kilos. What I would like you to do, based on your 1 rep max, is to work out each 1 rep max on how much you want your patient to be working, based on the figures on the left-hand side, 67, 68, 70 and above. So what are the basic components you need to consider when designing a strengthening program? You're thinking about the type of exercise, the volume or the dosage of exercise, frequency of training, rest period or length in between exercises, and the intensity of the exercise that you're asking your patient to do. When you're planning your program, making sure you're sequencing exercises effectively. So exercise large before small and perform multi-joint before single joint activities. If you're training all major muscle groups in one session, alternate between upper body and lower body. If training body areas on alternate days, then change from agonist to antagonist throughout the program. If you're training individual muscle groups, then do higher intensity before you do lower intensity. Fundamental principles of strength training. For a muscle to increase strength, it has to work to fatigue with a load placed upon it which exceeds its usual metabolic work rate. The principles of progressive overload is that as stress is placed on the body, it adapts to meet that stress. If the level of stress remains the same, there will be a time when the body has adapted sufficiently enough to deal with it. Therefore, any improvements to continue the level of stress or overload it then must be increased. So increasing training must be at an intensity greater than which it normally encounters or greater than it can currently cope with. If you overload it too quickly, then your body will break down and you will end up with an injury. So, a note of caution. The system being trained must be able to function to some degree under the stress for improvements to occur. If the stress is too great, the system is unable to function and no improvement will be achieved. Therefore, the stress needs to be increased gradually, allowing gradual improvements. The overload, therefore, must be applied progressively and in stages. Hypertrophy. There are a large number of progressive resistance training regimes, including training to failure, pyramid training, eccentric training, sometimes known as negative loading, forced or assisted repetitive training, descending sets, superset training, increased time under load training. Delayed onset muscle soreness. It's generally accepted that DOMS caused by mechanical stress on the muscle and tendon. It's normally micro tears occurring within the muscle fibers itself, causing some disarrangement within the sarcomeres. Structural damage is likely to trigger the immune response involving histamines, prostaglandins, and edema, and therefore results in pain. It's typically associated with the eccentric component of muscle contraction and usually appears between 24 to 48 hours after training. Big myth is that it does not, there's no evidence to support the theory that a buildup of lactate causes DOMS. The ACSM guidelines for muscular strength are outlined here. So frequency, intensity, time, and type. And the ACSM guidelines for muscular endurance are outlined here, again following the frequency, intensity, time, and type guidelines. Any additional considerations when you're designing an exercise program would be to think about neuromuscular efficiency, biomechanical efficiency, psychological factors, injury and fear of injury, fatigue, and DOMS.